All right, strap in everyone because we're going deep on Kanban today.
Oh, yeah, diving right in.
But, and here's the twist, we're not at the factory floor this time. We're talking Kanban for knowledge work. So think software teams, creative projects, um, maybe even your own to-do list. Who knows?
Yeah.
And, you've really piled it on this time. We've got articles, YouTube transcripts, even a whole glossary of Kanban terms. It's quite the mix.
Yeah, it's a real treasure trove, really exciting stuff. And it really shows you just how much Kanban has, well, kind of infiltrated all these different fields.
Totally. So I guess what we're after today is figuring out like where did this whole knowledge work Kanban thing even come from? How are people actually using it out there in the real world? And hey, maybe we'll even pick up a few tips for ourselves along the way. As we wade through all of this, what are you most curious about?
For me, it's got to be the why. Like,
Wow.
why is Kanban taking off the way it is? What problems is it solving that maybe like traditional methods just haven't been able to crack?
Let's go back to the beginning then. Kanban for knowledge work, as we know it, kind of popped up around 2004. And the story starts, kind of surprisingly, at Microsoft.
That's right, Microsoft. And right at the center of it all, you've got this guy, David Anderson. He was an IT manager who was, well, he was struggling with trying to make those classic agile methods fit in every single team.
So instead of finding a methods that actually worked for the team, they were trying to like jam the team into the method.
Yeah, you could put it that way. So Anderson, he gets inspired by, get this, Toyota's production system. And he starts playing around with what they call a pull system. Basically, the idea is a key member only starts working on something when they actually have the capacity for it, instead of having work just constantly piled on top of them. And that became kind of the seed for this whole Kanban for knowledge work thing.
So it's about letting the team pull work in when they're ready, not just getting buried, huh? I like that. And what's interesting is like one of the first places they tried this out was a team working remotely all the way in Hyderabad, India.
Yeah, that's right. Hyderabad, India. Right from the start, it was clear this wasn't just some Silicon Valley fad. And I think a big reason why it's caught on so widely is because it's all about small steps, incremental change, not like some agile methods where it's like rip everything out and start over.
So instead of a total system reboot,
Yeah.
it's more like taking what you've got and making little tweaks here and there.
Exactly, precisely.
Yeah.
And that really resonated with a lot of people who weren't exactly thrilled about throwing out their whole way of working.
I get that. And speaking of how far Kanban's reached, it's pretty wild to see where it's being used these days.
Yeah.
We've got examples from high fashion, like runway stuff, all the way to global chemical giants.
Oh, yeah, the range is really amazing, really shows you how adaptable it is. It might be helpful to dive into a couple of those examples a little more.
Love to. Okay, so on the one hand, we've got this designer fashion company using Kanban to, get this, manage their entire supply chain.
I mean, think about it. They've got to keep those runway shows running smoothly. And to do that, keeping your suppliers happy is absolutely critical. And that's where Kanban comes in. It helps ensure that everything's flowing.
Talk about high stakes. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you've got BASF, this huge chemical company. They're using Kanban to streamline how they modify their plants.
And the results got pretty mind-blowing. They went from having like over 140 projects all going at the same time down to a much more manageable 64. That's a massive productivity jump.
That's not just a little improvement, that's a total transformation.
What do you think it is about Kanban that makes it work so well in such different worlds?
I think one of the biggest things is just how visual it is. You've got those Kanban boards, no matter what industry you're in. It gives everyone a shared view of what's happening, where the hiccups are, how things are moving. It makes everything transparent, so it's way easier to work together. It's like having this giant map of your workflow that everyone can see and understand, right? Now, this is where things get interesting. When we look at how Kanban and Agile relate, some of what we've been reading, it's like they're rivals. Kanban's this alternative path to agility. But then other stuff talks about blending them together, these hybrid projects. What's the real story?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? To really get it, we need to understand what each one emphasizes. Kanban, at its core, is about flow, making sure work moves through the system smoothly and efficiently. Agile, on the other hand, it's more about iterative development and getting that customer feedback throughout the process.
So they're not necessarily fighting each other. They're just focusing on different parts of becoming agile. It's funny, David Anderson himself, he actually admitted that his first book on Agile, he said, was like 1/3 complete nonsense. Sounds like you realized Kanban was this missing piece he hadn't figured out yet.
That's a great anecdote, isn't it? I think it really shows how our understanding of things can change over time. Kanban wasn't about tossing agile out the window, it was about realizing it could be better, more complete.
And that ties into what I think is one of the coolest things about Kanban. You don't have to scrap your entire process and force your team into some preset mold. You start where you are and make things better a little at a time.
It's a much more natural approach, a lot less disruptive. It's not some top down order. It's about giving teams the power to figure out what works best for them.
Exactly. So let's shift gears a little and talk about the human side of Kanban. It's about people, not just processes, right?
100%. One of the things we read actually used Justin Bieber as an example of how to get a team to change. Might sound kind of out there, but it really highlights how important it is to find those creative ways to inspire people, to give them ownership.
Okay, gotta admit, wasn't expecting a Justin Bieber reference in our Kanban deep dive. But I get it. Sometimes you need a fresh approach to get people excited about change. It's not always about rigid rules, it's about connecting with people and helping them see things differently.
Exactly. And that leads us to this idea of Kanban maturity levels. Basically, it shows there's a progression from teams just starting out with Kanban to those who've rolled it out across the entire company.
Like a journey everyone's on, just at different points along the path.
Yeah, and what really stood out to me was how much emphasis there is on leadership in this whole process. There's a huge difference between leaders who just bark orders and those who create this culture of continuous improvement where everyone feels like they can contribute.
It's the difference between managing tasks and actually leading people. And
Mhm.
it seems like in a Kanban environment, that leadership style is key. Okay, this is the part I'm really excited about. This idea of personal Kanban. It's so cool how you can take these Kanban principles and apply them to your own workflow.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how it can work on an individual level. And the stuff we've got here has some really practical tips on how to do that.
Let's hear them. Let's see if we can sprinkle a little Kanban magic on our own lives.
One of the biggest things with personal Kanban, I think, is how it helps you see your workflow, actually visualize it. Even something as simple as like using sticky notes for your to do list can make a huge
It's like
difference.
getting it all out of your head, right? Putting it somewhere you can actually see it and work with it.
Yeah.
I've tried that before, and it really is amazing how much clearer things get when you're not trying to keep it all up here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And once you can see everything laid out like that, you can start figuring out what needs to get done first. And you can spot those bottlenecks before they even happen. Another thing that's super important is limiting your work in progress. Don't try to do everything at once. Focus on finishing what you started before jumping into something new.
Oh man, that's where I get tripped up all the time. I always think I'm being more efficient by multitasking, but honestly, it just ends up slowing me down in the end.
Multitasking, it's a real productivity killer. When you focus on just one thing at a time, you can really give it your all. And that usually means the quality of your work is better too. Okay, last tip, and this one's really powerful. Use classes of service. Basically, it's assigning a priority level to each of your tasks so the really urgent or important stuff doesn't get lost in the shuffle.
Like a triage system for your to do list,
Yeah,
making sure you're tackling the most critical things first.
exactly. It's a way to bring more structure and intention to your workflow.
It's funny, as we're talking about this, it all seems like common sense.
Mhm.
But it's crazy how often we forget these things when we're caught up in the daily grind. Kind of helps us bring that awareness back.
Yeah, I think that's true. Sometimes we need a system, a framework to remind us of the stuff we already know deep down.
Okay, so let's say someone's listening to this and they're totally on board. They want to try Kanban. What are some of the biggest mistakes they should watch out for?
Ooh, good question. I think one of the biggest ones is thinking Kanban is just another project management method
Hmm.
or that it's here to replace Agile. It's not. It's more like a change management method that you can use to improve whatever process you're already using, whether it's Agile, Waterfall, or something else entirely.
So Kanban's not about dictating how you work. It's about giving you the tools and principles to make what you're doing even better.
Exactly. It's about optimization, not overhauling everything. Oh, another common one, people thinking Kanban is all about the board, the physical board.
I can see that the visual aspect is definitely eye-catching.
Yeah, but the board is just a tool. It's helpful, sure, but it's not what Kanban is really about. The real magic is in the principles behind it. Visualizing your work, limiting work in progress, managing the flow, using feedback to continuously improve.
It's more about a shift in how you think about things, not just a new set of tools.
Exactly. And you mentioned feedback loops there. Those are super crucial in Kanban. They're how you make sure you're always learning and adjusting.
Can you give us some examples of how those feedback loops actually work in practice?
Sure. At the team level, you've got the daily Kanban meeting. Everyone gets together around the board. They talk about what's moving, what's stuck, any patterns they're seeing. It's a really focused, short feedback loop to make sure everything's flowing smoothly.
So it's not just about reporting on progress, it's about working together to figure out how to solve problems.
Exactly. And then you've got longer feedback loops, like the service delivery review. That's where the team takes a step back, looks at how they did over the past week or two, and brainstorms ways to make their process even better.
So it's like zooming out to see the bigger picture and making course corrections if you need to.
Yes. And at the organizational level, you've got things like the operations review. That's where leaders from different departments come together, look at the big picture metrics, talk about strategic goals, make sure everyone's on the same page.
It seems like Kanban really emphasizes feedback at every level, from individuals all the way up to the entire organization. It's this constant cycle of learning and improving.
Precisely. And that constant feedback is what drives that continuous improvement and makes Kanban such an effective way to manage change.
We've covered a lot of ground here, haven't we? The origins of Kanban, how people are using it, even some of the traps to watch out for.
We've really got into the nitty gritty of Kanban, that's for sure.
But there's one thing we haven't really touched on yet. And I think it's something a lot of people struggle with, especially as teams grow or projects get more complex. I'm talking about dependency management. How do you handle those situations where something's stuck because you're waiting on someone else to finish their part?
Dependencies, those can be tricky. No easy answers there. But the good news is, Kanban gives you a bunch of techniques and strategies to manage them effectively.
Well, that's a relief.
Huh.
Tell me more.
Okay, so first things first. You got to make those dependencies visible. Remember, visualization is key. By clearly marking those dependencies on your board, maybe using different colored cards or connecting lines, you make sure everyone knows they're there. And that encourages people to communicate proactively.
It's like that saying, out of sight, out of mind. Kanban helps us avoid those situations where something's just sitting there for days because nobody realized it was waiting on something else.
Exactly. And once you've got those dependencies out in the open, you can start brainstorming ways to deal with them. Maybe you prioritize tasks that don't have as many dependencies. Maybe you break down big tasks into smaller, more independent chunks. Or maybe you even set aside some capacity specifically for the type of work that tends to have a lot of dependencies on other teams.
So there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of room for creativity in how you approach dependency management within Kanban.
Absolutely. It's all about finding the best solution for your specific situation. And that's one of the things I love about Kanban. It's not a rigid set of rules, it's a framework for thinking about and solving problems together iteratively.
It's about empowering teams to find solutions, not just follow a script. You mentioned reserving capacity, and I know that's a big part of Kanban, especially when it comes to handling different types of work and making sure those urgent requests don't derail everything. Can you explain how that works in practice?
Sure. In Kanban, you allocate capacity to different classes of service. Basically, you're setting aside a certain number of slots on your board for each type of work.
So it's like creating dedicated lanes on a highway for different types of vehicles. You're making sure there's space for everything to move smoothly.
Perfect analogy. So, for example, you might have a class of service for expedited work, things like urgent bug fixes or client requests. You could set a limit, like maybe only two of those things can be in progress at any given time. That way, you're always ready to handle those urgent issues without totally neglecting your regular work.
Like having an emergency room in a hospital. Right. You need it, but you don't want it taking over the entire hospital.
Exactly. Got to maintain that balance. And then you might have another class of service for your regular work, things like feature development or maintenance tasks. And that's where you'd allocate most of your capacity.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, being able to respond to those urgent needs while still making progress on your regular commitments.
Yep, finding that balance. And as you get more comfortable with Kanban, you can get even fancier with how you allocate capacity, maybe creating different classes of service based on things like risk, value, even how much effort something's going to take.
Like choosing between ordering a la carte or going for the prefix menu.
Yeah.
Right. You pick what works best for you.
I like that analogy. It really highlights how flexible and adaptable Kanban is. You can tailor it to fit your specific situation and goals.
You know, we've talked a lot about the nuts and bolts of Kanban, but there's also this deeper, almost philosophical side to it that I find really interesting. It's not just a set of techniques, it's a whole way of thinking about work and collaboration. And it's based on principles of respect, transparency, continuous improvement.
That's a great point. And those principles, they can go way beyond the workplace. You can apply them to your personal life, your relationships, even your hobbies, really anything where you're trying to grow and get better.
It's about embracing this idea that we're always learning, always evolving.
Exactly. And that's what makes Kanban more than just a way to be more productive. It's a philosophy for living a more intentional, fulfilling life.
It's amazing to think that something that started out as a way to make factories run smoother has become such a versatile and powerful framework.
It really shows you the power of a good idea and how it can spread and adapt in ways you never expected. It's really cool to see how Kanban has taken root in so many different areas.
And speaking of evolution, we've talked a lot about how Kanban encourages continuous improvement. But what does that actually look like in the real world? How do teams and individuals actually put that into practice?
That's a fantastic question. And that leads us perfectly into the final part of our deep dive. Let's explore how this idea of continuous improvement plays out in the world of Kanban.
So, when we talk about continuous improvement with Kanban, what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, let's say you've got a software development team using Kanban to manage their work. One of the things they might focus on is trying to reduce their lead time. So, the time it takes for a task to go from, hey, we need this, to boom, it's done.
Makes sense. Lead time's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Both for the team to be efficient and to keep their customers happy. Nobody wants to wait forever for a new feature or a bug fix.
Exactly. So the team would really dig into their workflow, figure out where the bottlenecks are, and try different ways to make things move faster.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, they could try breaking down those big, complicated tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks. Or they could limit how many things are in progress at the same time. They could even try using automation to handle those repetitive tasks.
So it's like they're taking those ideas from lean manufacturing and applying them to software.
You got it. And as they make these changes, they'd keep track of their lead time to see if it's actually getting better. If it's going down, great, they're on the right track. If not, it's back to the drawing board to try something different.
So it's all about experimenting and making adjustments based on what the data is telling them.
Exactly. And Kanban is perfect for this kind of ongoing experimentation and learning. It encourages teams to be curious, to question assumptions, to always be looking for ways to do things better.
That's like building a culture where innovation and improvement are just part of everyday life.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about teams, but what about individuals? How can someone use this continuous improvement idea for their own work?
That's a good question. I'd say it starts with taking a good hard look at how you work right now. What's working well? What's driving you crazy or slowing you down?
It's like taking inventory of your workspace, both the physical space and your mental space, seeing what needs to be decluttered or reorganized.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Once you have a clear picture of where you're at, you can start to identify those little changes that can make a big difference.
So it's not about trying to change everything overnight. It's about those small, sustainable tweaks over time.
Exactly. Maybe you decide to block out the first hour of every day for focused work, or maybe you try that time boxing technique to manage your schedule. The point is, you got to experiment and figure out what works best for you.
It's like becoming a scientist of your own productivity.
I love that. And just like a scientist, you got to keep track of the results. Are you getting more done? Are you feeling less stressed? If the answer is yes, keep doing what you're doing. If not, adjust and try something else.
It's that feedback loop again, but this time it's all about you.
Exactly. And by embracing this idea of continuous improvement, whether it's at work or in your personal life, you're setting yourself up for growth and, well, a more fulfilling life.
It's all about becoming a better version of yourself, both professionally and personally.
Well said. And Kanban, with its focus on visualization, flow, feedback, and continuous improvement, it gives you this powerful framework to reach those goals.
So as we wrap up our Kanban deep dive, I'm really struck by just how versatile and adaptable these principles are. Whether you're a developer, a designer, a team leader, or just someone trying to get a handle on their to-do list, there's something here for everyone.
Absolutely. Kanban's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but it gives you this amazing toolbox filled with techniques for tackling problems and finding more effective, more fulfilling ways to work.
It's a good reminder that we're all on this journey of continuous learning and improvement, and there's always room to grow.
That's what makes it so exciting, right? We're never done learning, we're never done improving, and Kanban gives us the framework and the mindset to support us along the way.
So as we sign off, remember this is just the start of your Kanban journey. Keep exploring. Experiment with what resonates with you and see how these principles can change how you work and how you live.
We're excited to hear about your discoveries.
Until next time, keep on diving deep.